Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're going to strip everything back. We're not talking about the economy or politics or the latest tech. We are talking about a war,
A silent one.
a silent, invisible war that's happening right now inside all of us between what our source calls the clay idols of this world, the stuff you can touch and see, and an invisible God.
It's a huge topic.
It is. And we're diving into a concept that is, frankly, a little terrifying. It's called heart atheism. And this isn't about people who say God doesn't exist. This is about the people who say he does, but live their lives as if he doesn't matter at all.
That's the real disconnect, the difference between what you profess and what you actually truly rely on when things get tough.
And to explore this, we're digging into a collection of letters from a man named Samuel Rutherford. This is a 17th century Scottish minister, but he wasn't writing these from a comfortable study.
No, not at all. He was writing from a prison cell in Aberdeen. He was locked up for his faith, cut off from everyone, and yet he called that prison Christ's Palace.
Christ Palace. That just tells you everything about his mindset.
It really does. Rutherford is just this fascinating figure because he combines this an intense, almost romantic love for the divine with a really brutal, uncompromising logic about human nature.
So our mission today is to unpack that. His view on the emptiness of the material world versus the reality of God.
And I should warn you, Rutherford doesn't believe in balance. He thinks what we often call a balanced life is, well, he'd call it spiritual treason.
Spiritual treason. Wow. Okay, let's start there. With this idea of atheism. Because, if I ask someone on the street if they're an atheist, they're thinking about scientific materialism.
They're thinking about Richard Dawkins, yeah.
But that's not what Rutherford means. He's using this word to describe something much more subtle, isn't he?
He is. For Rutherford, atheism isn't an intellectual checkbox. It's a posture of the heart. He introduces this character in his letters that he calls the time-turning atheist.
The time-turning atheist. That sounds like a sci-fi villain.
It kind of does, but I think you'll find it's describing something very, very common.
Okay.
It describes adaptability, but in the worst possible way. Rutherford says this person has one God and one religion for summer, and another God and another religion for winter.
So when the sun is shining and life is good, you're religious. But when winter comes, when it's cold, unpopular, or difficult, you just switch gods.
You switch to whatever works, whatever gets you through. Rutherford argues that this person's conscience runs on oiled wheels.
Oiled wheels, that's such a great image, so specific.
Well, think about it physically, right? An oiled wheel has no friction, it makes no noise, it just glides. Rutherford says this kind of conscience glides along on time, custom, and the world.
So if society says turn left, the wheels just turn left. Instantly. No resistance.
No resistance at all. If the culture shifts and says go right, the wheels turn right.
That's pretty scary because we usually think of a lack of friction as a good thing. We want life to be smooth.
Of course we do.
We want to fit in to get along. But Rutherford is saying that if you never feel any friction with the world, it's probably because you aren't actually standing for anything. You're just rolling.
You're worshiping the moment. If your moral compass is just a reflection of custom, what's popular, what's safe, then you aren't worshiping God. You're worshiping safety. You've let the world steer.
It makes me think of, social media algorithms. We just consume whatever is fed to us. If your morality is just whatever the feed says is good today, Rutherford would call that atheism.
He absolutely would. Because you've displaced the authority of the divine with the shifting authority of the now. You are a practical atheist. The now is the only God you actually obey.
I want to dig into what drives those oiled wheels.
Okay.
But before we do that, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming to you.
It does. So we have this image of the oiled wheels, but Rutherford goes deeper into the psychology of it. He uses a metaphor about light that I think really explains why we do this. He says we detained truth in unrighteousness.
Detain it, like we're arresting the truth, putting it in handcuffs.
In a way, yes. He says we have a false light inside us that acts like a thief. And this thief, it steals the lantern.
Steals the lantern. Okay, walk me through that one.
Imagine your conscience is a lantern. Its job is to light the path, to show you what's true. But Rutherford says we have this other drive, this false light, which is our desire for comfort, for our own way.
Right.
And this false light comes in, takes the lantern, and just points it somewhere else. It convinces you that what is safe is actually what is right.
That is insidious.
Yeah.
So it's not that you're just doing evil. It's that you've tricked yourself into thinking your self-interest is actually morality.
Exactly. I'm not speaking up because I want to keep the peace, when really you're just afraid. And Rutherford names the culprit. He identifies the thief. He calls it the house devil.
The house devil.
He writes, "The house devil of every man that eateth up all religion is self." He traces almost every failure in the Bible back to this one root. The house devil isn't some external demon. It's you.
Can you give an example?
He looks at Eve. What made her fall? Self. She wanted something for her own elevation. He looks at Judas selling Jesus. Self-love, greed. But the one that always hits me the hardest is Peter.
When he denied Jesus.
Yes. Rutherford calls it self-love to a whole skin.
Self-love to a whole skin.
Yeah.
Wow, that is just cutting. It wasn't some deep theological crisis. He just didn't want to get hurt.
He wanted his skin to stay whole, and that biological instinct to protect the self, the body, the bank account. Rutherford says that is the root of atheism, because in that moment when you choose your whole skin over the truth, you're declaring that the Roman soldier with the whip is more real to you than God is.
The soldier can hurt you now. God is somewhere else.
Yeah.
So self prioritizes the immediate threat.
The self prioritizes the clay. And that brings us perfectly to the other side of this war. If the house devil is the enemy inside, the clay idol is the enemy outside.
And Rutherford's view of the outside world is, well, it's bleak. I mean, we spend our lives trying to build things here. Careers, houses, reputations. Rutherford looks at all of it and basically just laughs.
He doesn't just laugh, he mourns it. He uses this incredibly vivid, aggressive imagery. He calls the world a clay idol, a painted shadow.
A painted shadow. I like that. It suggests it has the shape of something real, but there's no substance. You try to grab it, your hand goes right through.
Exactly. He talks about worm-eaten joys. Imagine that. You bite into what looks like a perfect apple, and it's just full of worms. He compares worldly glory to feathers flying in the air, or my favorite, houses of sand within the sea mark.
Within the sea mark, meaning the tide is coming in. It's not a question of if it will fall, but when.
It's inevitable. Rutherford even calls the world a stepmother to the believer.
That's a funny twist. We always hear about Mother Earth. Rutherford says, no, she's your wicked stepmother.
His point is, if you're a child of God, this world shouldn't feel like home. If the stepmother is treating you too well, you should probably be suspicious. But the core of his argument is that the world is a beguile, a trick. He calls it a living, breathing, dying nothing.
A living, breathing, dying nothing. That paradox is great. It looks alive. It breathes. The economy moves. Politics moves. But at its core, it's nothing. And it's in the process of dying.
Rutherford uses the analogy of an inn to make it practical. He says our soul is just lodging here for the night. This life is a hotel room. But he warns that the inn itself is structurally unsound. He asks, why would you build a treasure in a house that is about to burn down?
It's like we're obsessively redecorating a hotel room while the demolition crew is wiring the basement.
We are polishing the brass on the Titanic. He says, how soon will this house scale? Which is an old Scots word for break apart, and the inn, where the poor soul lodgeth, fall to the earth. He looks at our obsession with stability and just sees madness. We're worshiping a well-favored little clay god that's going to shatter.
So we've got the house devil of self inside and the clay idol of the world outside. It feels a bit like we're trapped. Which leads to the obvious question, if the world is a crumbling inn and God is the only reality, why does he let his people suffer?
Right. Rutherford is sitting in a cold prison cell as he writes this. He's not living the blessed life.
Not at all.
And this is where his theology gets really profound and where he challenges, the modern skeptic. We tend to think that if life is hard, God is absent or angry. Rutherford argues the exact opposite. He says suffering is actually proof of God's attention.
That is a hard sell. I'm making you suffer because I love you.
It is. He uses the metaphor of the furnace. He says God melts the old drossy kirk, the church or the soul, to bring out a new bride. Think about metallurgy. You don't put a pile of dirt in a high-intensity furnace.
You put gold ore in there.
You put gold ore in there. You only apply that kind of heat to something that has value, something you're trying to refine.
So the heat isn't punishment, it's purification. The fact that you're in the fire means the goldsmith thinks you're worth the fuel.
Rutherford goes so far as to say, grace grows best in winter. He claims he gets his feast from Christ in the prison, not outside of it. He says the king's feast is greatest in the king's house, and for him, that dungeon was the king's house. That's where he met God.
He has this one phrase I wrote down, God's glooms are better than the world's joys. That just reframes everything. Even a frown from God is better than a smile from the world.
And he talks about the dumb rod,
The dumb rod.
as in a rod that doesn't speak. He says, even when the punishment seems silent, it speaks to the wise man. Sometimes in suffering we scream, why? And there's no answer. Rutherford says the silence is the answer. The rod itself is the message.
A call to wake up.
To detach from the clay idol, it connects right back to the atheism idea. The time-turning atheist sees suffering as chaos, as bad luck. The oiled wheels just move away from pain. But the believer sees it as carved work.
Carved work. I like that. God is the potter, we are the clay. And the clay can't talk back to the potter.
Exactly. If the potter is cutting and scraping and pressing hard, it's not because he hates the clay, it's because he's making a vessel. You don't carve a rock you don't care about.
I love that. We're complaining about the chisel and Rutherford saying he is carving you into a masterpiece, stop moving. But he doesn't pretend this is easy. He is not selling some cheap bumper sticker faith. He talks about something called the nick.
The nick. In Scots, a nick is a notch, a really narrow mark or a target. He writes, there is a nick in Christianity, to the which whosoever cometh they see and feel more than others can do.
So it sounds like a level of precision, like hitting a bullseye.
It is, and it's the opposite of what he calls country holiness.
Country holiness, I'm guessing that means just being a regular, decent person.
That's it. Being a good citizen, paying your taxes, waving to your neighbors. Rutherford warns that this is dangerous. He says, common honesty will not take men to heaven.
That is a scary thought for a lot of people. I think we all like to think, I'm a good person, surely that's enough.
Rutherford says absolutely not. He says many are beguiled. People sleep through life, remember the oiled wheels, relying on this country holiness. They give their conscience to a deputy, maybe their culture or their family, and they just sleep until it's too late. He says they only wake up when the smoke of hellfire hits them.
He has that incredible metaphor to explain how narrow the path is. He calls the gospel a hair.
Yes. He says the gospel is like a small hair that has no breadth and cannot be split.
You can't split a hair.
Meaning you can't negotiate, you can't take the parts you like, the comfort, the community, the promise of heaven, and leave the parts you don't, the suffering, the self-denial. He says you can't have Christ. You can't say, I'll give Jesus my Sundays, but the world gets my business practices.
It's binary.
Yeah.
You're either on the hair or you are off it. There's no middle ground.
The hair is too thin to divide. You have to take the whole thing.
Okay, so let's just pause and look at the landscape Rutherford has painted here.
Mm-hmm.
We have a world that is a clay idol, a deceptive, dying nothing.
Right.
We have a self that is a traitorous house devil. We have a path that is as narrow as a hair. I mean, honestly, this sounds impossible. Where is the hope in any of this?
The hope is the pivot point of his entire theology. If the world is empty and the heart is deceitful, you need an anchor that is completely outside of both. And for Rutherford, that anchor is the loveliness of Christ.
And he is absolutely obsessed with this. When you read the letters, the tone just shifts from this harsh, jagged warning to something incredibly tender. They really do read like love letters.
They do. He calls Christ the unknown all in all. He complains that we rarely read God. It's like we glance at the headlines of who God is, but we never read the article. We don't study him.
And he tries to do this math of heaven, to explain what we're missing.
It's this beautiful, poetic attempt to describe the indescribable. He says, imagine you created millions of heavens, just vast universes of perfection.
Okay.
Then double them, then fill them all with angels. He says all of that, millions of heavens stacked on top of each other, wouldn't be a scale large enough to weigh Christ's worth. He says, if their love were bigger than 10 heavens, all in circles beyond each other, it were all too little for Christ our Lord.
10 heavens in circles beyond each other. He's trying to break our brains a little bit. He's trying to snap us out of the trance of the clay idol.
Because if you truly see the ocean, you stop being impressed by a mud puddle. Rutherford is trying to drag us out of the mud puddle and force us to look at the ocean.
Now, what strikes me is that it's not just about size or grandeur. It's about intimacy. He talks about kissing the mask.
Yes, that's one of his most poignant images. He says that even when Christ is hidden, when he's in the glooms, in the silence of the prison, he is content to kiss the mask of Christ. He trusts the person behind the mask, even if he can't see the face.
And he talks about the smell of his garments. That implies you are standing right next to him. You can't smell someone's clothes from a distance.
It implies an embrace, even in the dark.
There's this term he uses too, the earnest of the Spirit.
An earnest, yeah. It's a legal term. It's a down payment. In real estate, it's the money you put down to prove you're serious about buying the house.
Okay.
Rutherford says the joy he feels, even in his suffering, is the down payment on heaven. It's the proof that the deal is going through.
And that leads to that great line, which I think sums up his resilience. Faith allows you to dance while Christ sings.
Faith may dance because Christ singeth. It's the idea that our joy is responsive. We don't have to generate the music ourselves. Christ provides the melody, the truth, the promise, and our job is just to dance to it.
Even if the world is playing a funeral march, if you hear Christ singing, you dance.
That's the idea.
That is a powerful place to land. So let's just step back and look at the journey we've taken. We started with the time-turning atheist, this person who is just shape-shifting to fit the world, running on oiled wheels.
A person who has successfully adapted to a dying nothing. They've built their house in a crumbling inn.
And Rutherford takes us to the terror of that, the realization that our self is a saboteur to this view of suffering as a refining fire.
A furnace that burns away the clay so the gold remains.
And finally, he leaves us with a view of a God so immense that millions of worlds can't contain him, yet intimate enough to be with you in a prison cell.
It's a massive challenge to stop having our lives. We want the clay idol and the invisible God. Rutherford is shouting from the 17th century, it doesn't work. The hair cannot be split.
It's a call to be whole.
To be sincere, unfeigned, honest, and upright-hearted.
And to realize that the house devil of self is the only thing standing in the way.
Indeed.
So, here's the thought we want to leave you with today. It comes straight from the text, and it's something I've been chewing on since I read it. Rutherford asks, if we are building our lives on yesterday's being.
Things that are already fading. Things that belong to the past the moment they happen.
Exactly. So if the world is just a painted shadow, and if the sun is going down on this inn, what are you actually holding on to right now in your heart, not your hands, that will survive the night?
What survives when the clay breaks?
That's the question. Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.